I see courage as a result of dealing with fear. Courage is a result of an individual making a decision to go on in spite of fear, that there is no courage without fear.
I mean, I know there are firemen and policemen, we say they are brave, but some policemen like to be in a battle with guns. Some firemen like to be in a burning building. Some soldiers want to be in combat, but that's not bravery.
Bravery happens when you're afraid and you put your hand on the door going in the burning building, afraid for your life and afraid for the life of the person who's in the building, who is the reason why you put your hand on the door and open it and go in.
So you have to control your thoughts. You know, brothers, you got to control how you think. Then maybe you have a chance to control how you act. But that's what I think, that's what I feel, that's what I believe.
Actor, writer, director, educator Barry Scott is a master communicator with a message that matters to people from middle school students to corporate CEOs.
I never leave an experience having experience with Barry upset or feeling like I'm lacking in any way, because there's such an emotional experience with them.
So what do you do when you are afraid? What do you do with fear, courage under fire? And in my talk, in my lecture, my philosophy is trying to have a dialogue with people about the nature of fear and the presence of courage.
In school, in the marketplace, in everyday life.
He slowly went into his free pocket and he pulled out a badge and he pressed it to the glass of the window, and I could read what it said. It said Metropolitan Police Department. And he said, "Shut up, nigger, and get out of the car." Of course I knew to obey the police. I got out of the car and I put my hands in the air and I said, "My name is William Barry Scott. I live at 2416 Whites Creek Pike. My phone number is CA80226. I go to Kane Avenue Missionary Baptist Church where Reverend Albert G. Jones is the pastor. My father's name is H. Emmett Scott." He cut me off. He said, "I know who you are. I know your family. I know your father and I know your mother." And I was relieved. He said, "What's your father's name again?" I said, "His name is Emmett." He said, "Oh yes, old Emmett. I know your father. He's a drunk." I said, "No, my father's a school teacher." He said, "No, your father's a drunk." He said, "That lazy bastard has never had a job in his life. Isn't that right, boy? Isn't that right, nigger?" He said, "Say yes, sir." And I had my hands in the air. I said, "My father is a school teacher." And he pressed the gun hard to my face. And he said, "Say yes, sir." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Say my father's a drunk." I said, "My father is a drunk." And then he said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "Don't you know you niggers brought this on yourself, that you're ruining the country?" He said, "I'm going to have to kill you tonight because you're a thief." I said, "I'm not a thief." He said, "If you're not a thief, when you grow up, you will become one." He said, "You're a killer." I said, "I'm not a killer." He said, "Yes, you are." He said, "Because if you grow up, you'll become a killer. And I'm going to do America a favor, and I'm going to eliminate you. You do understand, don't you, boy? Say yes, sir." And I said, "Yes, sir."
Words that are motivating with a delivery that is penetrating and powerful. These are the hallmarks of what Barry Scott brings to his audiences with Courage Under Fire.
And as I sat there, I did not know what to think. I did not know what to feel. I did not know what to believe. And my father came in, and he had the 16-millimeter film projector, and he turned it on, and it was the Martin Luther King speech, "I Have a Dream," the one we had listened to earlier, and we watched it in its entirety. And when it finished, my father just looked at me, and then he rethreaded the machine, and we watched the speech in its entirety for the second time. And when it finished, he didn't speak a word to me, he just looked at me. And then he rethreaded the film for the third time, and we watched it in its entirety. And when it finished, he just looked at me. Then he packed up the projector and left the room. And as I sat there, it occurred to me that I didn't have to be afraid anymore. Even though just a few moments earlier, I could not escape my fear. I didn't have to hate the police officer when just a few moments earlier, I thought it was my duty to hate him.
The stories of his dramatic life experiences hold lessons for any audience.
Ultimately, what he said, that they're important. As young African-American men in this society, that they are important people and they do have gifts and talents to bring to the table and to offer to society.
Some of their responses are the same responses that I get when I'm reciting speeches for CEOs. And I finish, I say, well, what do you think? What do you feel? What do you believe? The same responses, and even though they're cloaked in different language, rhetoric, and vocabulary.
To put a person like Barry Scott in front of a room of boys, Afro-American, Caucasian, whatever it may be, adults, young, whatever the case may be, I think really allows them to connect with him as a person and let them know that this is real.
Can you imagine sacrificing your life so someone else can have a better life? Can you imagine doing that? And what it takes to do that, what kind of courage.
But when Barry Scott enters your boardroom, classroom, or lecture hall, he doesn't enter alone.
But by all means, keep moving. If you can't be the sun, be a star.
Accompanying him for almost 40 years in appearances around the world are the words and seemingly the very presence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
There comes a time, my friends, when people get tired of being flung across the abyss of humiliation, where they experience the bleakness of nagging despair. There comes a time when people get tired of being pushed out of the glittering sunlight of life's July and left standing amid the piercing chill of an alpine November.
In spite of that, the main thing that gave me courage was the rhetoric of Martin King. And it reinforced what my parents were telling me, that I did have value, what my church was telling me, that I was as good as anyone else, and what my school was telling me, that I was a person of character. If I displayed high character, then that meant I was a good person. It reinforced all of that like no one else could. And he did it in such a passionate way.
He was speaking to children yet unborn. He was speaking to you. He was speaking to your children and to your children's children. Martin King said, whatever you choose to do with your life's work, do it as if God Almighty called you to do it. No matter how small it may happen to be, you must do an ordinary job in an extraordinary way, because we've come a long way, but we still have a long, long way to go. And so, young people, if it should fall your lot to sweep streets, sweep them like Michelangelo painted pictures, like Shakespeare wrote poetry, like Beethoven composed music.
Whether it's through his own voice or that of one of America's most dynamic leaders, Barry Scott delivers a motivational and inspirational message for businesses, churches, civic groups, and youth groups.
I think it makes individuals see themselves where they can go to, regardless of how far down they are, or feel that they are down. It gives them the courage to try.
And it made us think, feel, and believe, and especially at the end when he asked the audience, what do you think? What do you feel? What do you believe?
Can you look in the mirror and say what you really think about yourself? What do you think? What do you feel? What do you believe? What's your dream for America?
That more kids can grow up and be positive leaders instead of negative followers.
And as a communication tool, it harnesses, motivation. It harnesses the potential for inspiration. I mean, that is the whole idea. That is the purpose for introspection, to find self-worth, so that you find worth in others.
I was looking good. My afro was perfectly picked out. And back then people said I looked exactly like Michael Jackson. And you know what? I did. This is what Michael is supposed to look like today.
Like one of the kids said earlier, you had no choice but to pay attention because of his delivery style and how he delivered his message. It forces you to listen.
We're so quick to talk about what separates us, but my experience, you know, in the eyes of a boy who was born colored, you know, I see inclusion, and that's so satisfying.
For information on contacting Barry to bring the message of Courage Under Fire to your event or meeting, please visit Barry's website.